So I guess this is like after lunch, one more speaker between you and getting out of here. I'm going to try and I guess they put the light topic after the heavy topic of pests, but a lot about what I'm going to talk about today in terms of locating your hive will help you manage pests and diseases as well. So I hope you'll see how some decisions that you make early on about placement of hives and arrangements of hives really does fit into the overall integrated pest management theme. My name is Amy Clark. I've been a member of the Ashland Bee Club since a year before I started beekeeping. This is my 5th year, going into my 5th year. The summer was the first summer we actually harvested any honey to speak of. So persevere, that's my only thought. If you're in it for the honey, good luck. But it is a fascinating hobby. I'm going to talk about locating your beehives. How many folks here live in the country? Okay, good number. How many people are in like a subdivision or in a neighborhood where you're concerned about neighbors, concerned about people getting stung? You know, how do I be a good bee neighbor? I'm going to talk about the ideal space is no object. You have a lot of choices about where to put your hives. And I'm also going to talk about how to place your hives if you are in an urban or more suburban environment. Some considerations to keep in mind. So in an ideal world, wouldn't you love to have an apiary like that? You know? But we are all not able to spread out quite that much. There are several requirements I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about sunlight, I'm going to talk about water, I'm going to talk about spacing, I'm going to talk about airflow, I'm going to talk about flight paths and all those sorts of things. The key thing that you need to remember is that in siting your beehives, in siting your apiary, deciding where to put them, it's probably going to be one of the most important decisions you make. I will tell you, out of sight, out of mind, you really, really want to have your beehives so that they are convenient to you getting out there and working. And so if you want to weight all the different factors I'm going to talk about, accessibility for you, keep that at the top of your list as we go through this, okay? One of the things about bees are that they are, eager to get to work in the morning, but like most of us, if it's dark and cloudy, they're going to sleep in. You want to place your beehive so that they get hit by that early morning sun. And so a south, an east, or a southeast exposure is really, really important. It acts as an alarm clock. Bees are easier to work with if they're in the sunlight. They don't get cranky. My experience has been we've had them in shade and in sunlight. The sunlight bees are much more docile and easy to work with. So I would encourage you to find a location that has good early morning sun exposure. I would encourage you to look for a place that does get dappled shade in the afternoon. This bottom picture right here, when I first set up my hives, my husband and I, we had 2 hives. He built me this nice little deck. Can you see my deck? Got them up, and they were right by the fence so we could see them from our house. Had a good southeast exposure and not a tree in sight. In the summertime, those bees were bearding. The hive was under extreme stress because of the heat in the afternoon. Hence the patio umbrella. I don't know if you can see, but we've got foam insulation, those insulation boards over the top to try and keep the hives cool. You really, it's much better if you've got them situated so that there's afternoon shade. So along a tree line is wonderful. They do appreciate the shade, the dapple shade in the afternoon. So look for good exposure, but do keep in mind that in our summers when it gets really hot, they do suffer the heat. So, but you can always put up umbrellas. It worked that year. It worked. You want to make sure you can get to your beehives. A full beehive, and some of the folks in here with a lot more experience than I can correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience is that a good box, a heavy box, is 40 pounds. That's heavy. If you are having to move your boxes for extracting or moving equipment, you really want to make sure that it's convenient. We use a garden cart, but if I had my hives not in an open area, it would be hard to get that cart around. You want to make sure that you can work your beehives without having to move equipment. So you want everything to be right there. So you want to be able to have your beehives in a situation where you can get to them easily. You're going to be going out and checking in February and March. So they do need to be convenient, okay? Regular visits to your hive, and I know that folks have talked about this early on, is critical. You have, particularly if you buy a package, you're going to be checking them 2 or 3 times a week in the summertime. So if they're inconvenient, it's going to be hard for you to get out there. I'll tell you, February, when I'm going out to check, I really don't want to have to go a mile down the road. You know, I like going out into my backyard. So keep in mind that if you're watching your bees, regularly monitoring them for pests or for is the queen laying, or if you're just watching them, it's a lot easier to do if they're convenient. Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. This is protection from the wind. On your handout, there's a little diagram that actually shows in an ideal world how you would situate it. Wind can be real destructive, particularly in the winter, and so you do want to protect them from prevailing winds. That being said, they need airflow. Okay, they do need airflow. So if you've got a hill or an area where you can get them up, make sure you just don't put them at the top of the hill. Put them down a little bit so that they're not getting buffeted by the wind, but they're still getting good airflow. This is a little bit more extreme than the picture that Barbara showed, but if it helps if you've got fencing around them. You could put like burlap or the fabric that they use at the nursery to just as a windbreak around your existing fencing if you don't want to go through the full bales of hay. We have never used actual constructed windbreaks because our hives are now, they're no longer on that little platform. They're along a tree line that provides really good protection against heavy winds, so we don't have a need for it. So another advantage to using your natural, topography. If you've got a tree line or something that's in a good situation, it'll help it. Okay. So you do not want your beehives buffeted by winds. Okay, particularly in the winter. Okay. Water, particularly for those of you in a more urban or suburban setting, it's really important that you establish your water source early. Make sure that you've got water that's within 1/4 mile to 3/4 mile of your hive. Your bees will find the nearest water source, and if it's your neighbor's bird bath or your neighbor's swimming pool, once they discover that that's the place they want to get water, it's really hard to get them to go elsewhere. So think about water as a preliminary factor when you're siting your hives. If you don't have a natural water source, we actually used a chicken feeder that we filled with water. We've used kitty litter boxes that we've cleaned out and put bricks in it so that they have a landing pad. We've used bird baths, and we've placed them around our property in a number of different places so that you aren't dealing with everybody trying to get to the same bird bath. But they will go to bird baths and water sources that you provide. The key is you've got to keep them full. And you've got to make sure that they're set up for the bees to use. Bees will drown. So make sure that if you go online, you'll see people that float wine corks, which appeal to me for some reason. But you can build feeding stations, watering stations for your bees that are very, very effective. I would say, and Paul, you and others, Ron, y'all can weigh in on this. Water really is a key source or consideration for your bees. They will find it, but it really does. It helps them regulate the temperature of their hive. It's important for brood rearing. It doesn't have to be pure. I mean, they can have algae.
They prefer.
They like some of the yeah, they do. They like the minerals in it. So
if you have clean water, a bucket of clear water, and a bird bath that every bird in the county of Washington, moss growing around it, they'll go for the moss.
They will.
I don't know. So, but you're right. If you establish it, they'll pass that location down for the next 100 generations if you don't get them to start it off in the right place. If they learn that the generation, first bees go to your neighbor's swimming pool, I don't know how you're going to break them.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing problem.
So I encourage you to think about it and make sure you provide landing pads. And early on, we killed a lot of bees that we didn't need to kill inadvertently by not providing adequate landing space for them.
Is there any way to keep them away from the water source if you don't want to go somewhere specific?
Not really. Not really. Bee wrangling is really hard. So that's why I say do it early and make sure it's close. Ours is actually probably, I would say, 20 feet from our apiary, our main watering station. And we have a creek that's easily within a quarter of a mile, and they go to the sources that we've established because it's just right there for them. Okay. Another consideration is their food sources, their nectar and their pollen. What you want to look for is a variety of forage material that's blooming all year long, in essence. So it's a combination of trees, it's a combination of crops, it's a combination of flowers. Site your hives so that you maximize their access. Bees can feed anywhere. What you give up is honey if you don't have adequate amounts. They'll live and they'll thrive, but you won't get much honey if you don't have access to adequate forage material. I've listed here just a few of the plant types that you're looking for. If you've got, we had a lot of tulip poplars that were there when we moved in. We live on 15 acres. That's the major source of our spring nectar flow for our bees. I never even knew that bees got nectar from trees. I thought it was all wildflowers before I got into this. They love holly trees. They love tulip poplar trees. They like maples. They're, so they'll forage on trees. They do love herbs. I have extensive herb gardens that I've planted just for my bees. That includes things like mountain mint, which is not really an herb. But if you let your herbs flower, you have to let them flower. The bees love it. They just love it. I have, my husband and I have supplemented. We have vegetable gardens, and silly me, I thought pollination equaled honey. Well, it's pollen. You don't get a lot of honey from vegetables. What you get is pollen. But we also have planted clover, which if you've just got like even a 20 by 20 spot, you can plant clover or forage for your bees. Any type of native wildflower is really good. As well. But think in terms of seasonal plantings if you're supplementing what your bees can forage on. So think about a fall garden, think about a summer garden, think about a spring garden so that you've got food coming in all year long for them. Bees will fly within 1 or 2 miles. And so for those of you who live in a more agricultural area, the only suggestion I have is that you be aware of what type of pesticides are used near where your bees are foraging. There's not a lot you can do about it, but it may affect how you place your hives, what direction, it's something you do need to be aware of because that pesticide use can provide direct harm to your bees, like killing them, and it also can affect honey. So,
Red or white clover is better?
I believe that the red clover, it has to do with the size of the flower. That's my husband's. We plant the red. You need the type with the smaller flower so that they can get to the nectar. There's some of the clovers have flowers that they're just too deep.
The bee's tongue's not long enough.
Yeah, the bee's tongue.
It's crimson clover.
Crimson.
Not red and not German.
It's
crimson.
Crimson.
Has a spiky flower.
Yeah, the spiky flower.
Gotcha, thanks.
Okay. I will bring mountain mint in because it really does spread. And for those of you who come to the Ashland Beekeepers, I'd be glad to give away some, and it is wonderful. It is a wonderful, wonderful bee plant. Okay. If you go online and just Google bee plants, you will get lists and lists and lists of the type of plants for the Mid-Atlantic area that are successful. If you want to, not many of us can go out and plant our pasture, but one of the other things that my husband and I are practicing with, and we've only done it this one summer, so I don't have anything really to report, is we do have unused pasture land, and we've let it go to meadow, as opposed to bush hogging it, keeping it down in grass. We've let part of it go to meadow, and we have seen a real increase in the number of the native wildflowers that we have just on our property by not doing anything. It looks kind of crappy, but nobody's there to see it, so if you do have the flexibility and the ability to actually play with some property that you may have, let it go natural, it really can be an interesting experiment. Okay, so water, sunlight, and food. It's what we all need to live, right? In terms of setting up your actual apiary, you do need to make sure that you have adequate space for each individual hive, as well as all the hives that you plan on having in your apiary. The first year, we set up 2 hives, and we had that nice little deck that I showed you, and there was, plenty of space for each hive, 3 feet between the hives. They were kind of pointed in different directions, just like you're supposed to do. About 3 weeks after, actually it wasn't 3 weeks, it was 6 weeks after we got our hives set up, we went out and there was a swarm in our back pasture, and we had never had a swarm. At first we thought they were our bees. We had package bees. Package bees don't swarm typically because they're still in the buildup phase, but we didn't know that at the time. So here we were, we had 2 beehives, all our beehive space was taken up, and we had a 3rd colony looking for a home and no place to put them. This is one place where being an optimistic beekeeper is really a good strategy. You really do want to be set up for, if you plan on getting 2, set up for 4. Set up the space for 4. You don't have to have the actual hives themselves, but you do want an extra box or 2. But be optimistic, because what you don't want is to be faced with a swarm and have no place to put them.
That's why you need the extra boxes.
That's why you do need at least 1 extra deep, so that you can scramble around and find extras from other people if you don't want to make that initial investment. But I'm really not kidding. We were in a panic, and if it wasn't for Mike Sandridge having old boxes that he didn't mind lending out, we would have been really in trouble, because a swarm leaves within a day. I mean, you don't have a whole lot of time. Oh, gee, I think I'll go build a box. You don't have time to do that. So think optimistically when you're siting your hives and planning your spacing. Plan for 1 or 2 more hives than you actually think you're going to start with, just to give you that flexibility. Okay. Hives occupy basically, you can see, a 2x2 space. You want at least 3 feet between your hives so that you don't get drift between the hives. Have their entrances angled away from each other, so that as they're coming in, they don't get confused as to which door they need to be entering. I really like this setup. Ours are done individually. In our house, we have them on cinder blocks, 15 inches off the ground. Makes them convenient to work with. Discourages mice and other pests from getting in them. But this seems like a real flexible. ever have trouble with our singles, we have to move the whole thing. We can't just move the boxes. So I like this particular setup. As you can see, they've kept a lot of room around each pair so that they can put parts or whatever. You're going to be taking boxes off as you're doing your inspection, so you need a place to put your boxes. So you want to make sure that you've got good space around. With this setup, they've got workspace in between the two hives. So if you're planning on having two hives, this is really a convenient configuration for working your hives. Okay? So you do want them 15 inches off the ground, doors angled away from each other, southeast exposure. Okay?
Why do you cite in pairs?
We site in pairs for a couple of reasons, and we have 2 pairs of 2 in our apiary. For one thing, it really helps when you're doing comparisons. Who asked the question? Back there? When I'm observing a hive, when we started, I didn't know what a healthy hive was. I didn't know what it looked like. I know what a healthy hive looks like. I'm not sure I know what a real weak hive looks like. They go through cycles. But if you've got 2 of them side by side, it gives you a natural point of comparison. So you know if one's really strong, you can tell that the other's weak in comparison. So it really does help, I think, in the observation as much as anything. It's not because they need company or anything else. It's convenient to work on them. You don't have to like move your equipment but once. So you move your equipment to the central place, so you can work one and you can work the other. For me, I personally have found it extremely helpful in terms of observing the hive.
I'm going to add one other thing to it, and you heard this earlier from Mike, and others talk about if you have a weak hive and you go to combine it with a stronger hive. The rule of bees is they orient, as Mike said, their GPS to their site. If you go to combine 2 hives, and those hives are 50 feet apart, and you pick this hive up and combine it with this one, where are all the bees that came out of the hive? They're sitting over there 50 feet away. They don't know where this new site is. Doing it this way, you're close enough that if you had to combine them, you could move one over, move the other one over, and then in a day go in, or a day or 2 go in and combine them. They would all find the opening. They'd be a little disoriented, but they would be able to find it. The rule is generally move them less than 2 feet or more than 2 miles. Or more than 5 miles, excuse me.
Yeah.
It's got to go more than 5 miles before they lose their orientation and reorient.
On a day-to-day basis, though, would you say it's the observation?
Yeah, I agree. I'm just adding that if you,
Yeah.
and we encourage people to go to 2 hives by having them fairly, somewhat close to each other. If you're forced to combine, you can
That's
easily
right.
move them a little closer and then do the combination and not lose any bees.
Our pairs are on individual stands, though. I mean, we don't have like the bench configuration. We have like individual stands, so. But we do have them clustered by 2s.
How close do you have your hives to a front or back door where you actually have activity going in and out of it on a regular basis? One option I have for placement is maybe 50 feet from my front door.
It depends on how comfortable you are with them being that close. 50 feet sounds fine to me. I was doing some research on urban and suburban, and the recommendations I heard were like 20 feet from property lines or 30 feet from like a front sidewalk. So, I mean, that to me is kind of a worst case scenario. But again, yeah, Paul.
I was going to say, be careful about the glide patterns. Bees are coming in at about a 30-degree angle. So if you have your hive right next to your deck, and your deck's in the glide pattern, they're going to get
walking
all
all
afternoon. But if you're, if the hive is far enough away, your deck is high enough, just sort of look sideways at your hive at 30 to 45 degrees. Some of the bees take off at one altitude, the other one's coming for landing at a different altitude. So there'll be all kinds of activity going on in front of that hive. You don't want to have that be a doorway, but if you're back your hive, we're 12 feet away from your deck,
That's fine.
nobody'd even know it,
Yeah. So it has to do with the orientation, and we'll talk about flight patterns in a minute. But or, you know, the beeline that everybody talks about is real. It's real.
So, so you've got two sets of two. Your twos are 3 feet apart. How far apart are your sets? 20 feet?
I would say 20 feet, 20 feet. And we have had two in between the two existing ones. So they can be, as long as they're 3 feet apart, that, you know, I don't think. You know, in an urban or suburban setting, and by suburban, I mean, if you live in the country but you still have neighbors, anybody with neighbors, this is what I'm talking about here. What you want is for your bees not to be a nuisance. Okay, so anything that you can do to reduce that nuisance factor is going to help. And some of it's a real nuisance and some of it's a perceived nuisance, okay? So you don't want your beehives right at the sidewalk if you've got neighbors that are worried about getting stung. Even if you say, oh no, honeybees are gentle, blah, 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 you know, you just really need to be considerate. So I would say that one of the most important considerations is placement in a discrete area, or discrete placement of your hives so that they're not visible. In an urban area, this also reduces the chance that people will vandalize your hives. Okay, so you know, it's kind of like giving them privacy and respecting the sensibilities of your neighbors. So some bees are more aggressive than others. If you have a hive where the bees don't want to be handled, you know, you go out to check your hive and they won't leave your veil, you know, they follow you back to the house. And we have a hive that's like that. You really do, in a neighborhood type setting, need to consider that as something that you need to act on, either by requeening or looking for a gentler, you know, bees that are bred for more gentle behavior. So you do need to be aware that beehives have personalities, and there's some hives that just aren't meant to be in a neighborhood setting. Okay, and I'm not talking about Africanized bees, I'm just talking about the personality of a beehive. So if you have neighbors, you do have an obligation to be aware of the personality of your hives and take that into consideration. Requeening can sometimes take care of those sort of angry bees, and the type of bees that you purchase. You can, I think Russians and Italians are generally more, I'm looking to people that may have experience with others. I've only had Italian bees before, so, but you do need to keep in mind that the personality of the hive is important. The information that I found, I'm not an urban beekeeper, but I did find that with a 1/4 acre of property or less, that you really should limit the number of hives that you have. And the number I found was 4. Is it 3? Is it 2? Probably depends on your neighborhood, the layout of your yard, and a whole bunch of other things. But you do need to limit the number of hives that you have. The beeline. As Paul said, bees will come in and they come in high and come down low, and they come in front of the hive. So there is truly a bee line that you can anticipate, and so you don't want that bee line to be like kids' swing set in the middle of it, or you know, the sidewalk or other areas. You want to keep that in mind, and you also need to sometimes manipulate that. A solid fence or vegetation, the bees will come out and go up, and it changes their bee line. So 5 to 8 feet barrier in front will change the bee line to be above human height. Okay? So if you are in an urban setting, you can manipulate how you place and planting and structures around the beehive to make it so that it's not a nuisance, even in tight quarters. And that's, you can see here, this is an urban picture that they've got a high privacy fence. That the bees can get out, but it keeps them from annoying the neighbors, okay? In an urban setting, even more than a country setting, adequate water supply is critical, because if there's a wading pool next door, and in the summertime, May to October is when you're really concerned about adequate water, the bees are going to find the closest water source. So do pay attention to that. Okay. The handout that I provided you gives all these tips for you. If I had one suggestion, it would be to really take a look at your yard in the early morning, see where the sun hits, check it again in the afternoon, see where the shade lies, because you really will find ideal places, I think, regardless of the size of your yard or your plot. And with some minor reconfiguration or plantings or fences, you'll probably be able to find an almost ideal place for your bees. If you can't, I would opt for too much sun rather than too little sun. We moved one of our hives that was in that blazing heat to the corner of our vegetable garden, and we thought it was an ideal place, and it was right on a tree line, but because of the way the sun came, it was in the shade all the time, and within 2 months, that hive was dead because of chalk brood. It didn't have good airflow because the breeze was blocked by the trees. It was in the shade all the time. It was damp, and chalk, it didn't take any time it was a weak hive, which is why we moved it. I would opt for too much sun rather than too little sun. And as long as you've got good airflow, I would opt for less wind rather than wide out in the open. And keep in mind the bee line, because in a neighborhood or even with your own home, you want to manage that. Do you all have any questions? Yes, sir.
It's not your high personality question. In all the pictures in your slides, everybody's fully suited up. On TV, you see all these shows and people are shirtless. And so is it just a question of personality of your hive and how docile they are, or is it just a matter of...
It has to do with the time of year. I always wear gloves, and I always wear the veil, because it doesn't matter how docile they are. If they get in your hair, you're going to get stung because they can't get out. They get trapped. So that's as much just not their aggressiveness, but just what's going to happen when you're with the bees. I wear blue jeans. I wear a white long sleeve shirt. And I've had very docile bees where, you know, I felt like I probably could have gone in gloveless and it would have been fine. But one time I did that, I had to go to the emergency room and get my wedding ring cut off because I got stung on my hand. So, you know, these folks that you see with the beards and bees, all of it, those are folks that have been working with bees for a very, very long time. Bees are less aggressive when there's less honey to protect. So I would say earlier in the spring, sometimes they're more docile. But in good conscience, I could not recommend going without a veil or gloves. Unless you just are a real, you know,
Never go without a veil.
Never go without a veil.
Not worth getting stung in the eye.
No, that's very good. I want to thank you very much.